Again, the big idea in this series is that Jesus turns disappointment into joy. And this is directly related to a topic that Christians have been discussing for generations, a topic that can be quite controversial. That topic is, what about alcohol? After all, wine does play a very central part of the story. Let's read again how Jesus turned the water into wine. Nearby stood 6 stone water jars, the kind used by the Jews for ceremonial washing, each holding from 20 to 30 gallons. Jesus said to the servants, "Fill the jars with water." So they filled them to the brim. Then he told them, "Now draw some out and take it to the master of the banquet." They did so, and the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. So what about this? Was this actually alcoholic wine? Many people would say no, that Jesus would not have endorsed the use of alcohol, or that he would not have provided a way for people to get drunk. Now, I understand the motivation behind that argument. People are concerned about the damage that the abuse of alcohol does in our society. But it's hard to avoid the conclusion that this was real wine, because wine was simply the normal beverage at meals in that world, in that culture. There was no refrigeration, so there was no way to prevent a beverage from fermenting. Now, they often watered it down to dilute the strong flavor of the wine, so we don't know what the alcohol content was, but this would not have been mere grape juice. Now, notice what the wedding coordinator said about the wine. "And the master of the banquet tasted the water that had been turned into wine. He did not realize where it had come from, though the servants who had drawn the water knew. Then he called the bridegroom aside and said, 'Everyone brings out the choice wine first, and then the cheaper wine after the guests have had too much to drink. But you have saved the best until now.'" Now, the normal practice was that the wedding or the banquet hosts would usually use a lower quality of wine later, because by then people couldn't tell the difference. The guests had had too much to drink. Plus, at the heart of this story is the idea of joy. In the Bible, wine represents joy and gladness. For example, Psalm 104 talks about all the things that God has provided for his creation. It says he waters the mountains from his upper chambers. The earth is satisfied by the fruit of his work. He makes grass grow for the cattle and plants for man to cultivate, bringing forth food from the earth, wine that gladdens the heart of man, oil to make his face shine, and bread that sustains his heart. And so as God provides for all of his creation, for the needs of the cattle, the plants, etc., he provides these 3 things for human beings, and one of them is wine that gladdens the heart. And so wine represents a glad and joyful heart, and that's what Jesus was about in performing that miracle that day. As a result, we see that alcohol can be a blessing, and the psalm views it as God's provision. But alcohol can also be a curse. Do not be drunk on wine, which leads to debauchery. Instead, be filled with the Spirit. We're called as Christians to be influenced by the Holy Spirit, not to put ourselves under the influence of this other spirit, the spirits of alcohol, because the results of drunkenness are negative for us. So drunkenness is never an option for a Christ follower. And so it becomes a personal decision that each one of us has to make about whether or not to use alcohol. And I encourage you to be deliberate about that decision. You should have a reason for how you approach this, not just because of what others do or what others say. And to summarize, I think we can talk about 3 factors that would affect that decision. First of all, you have permission from God, but you need to understand the limits of that permission. Secondly, you should understand the negative effects of alcohol abuse and what it does in our society and what it does to people. And third, you should think about the effect of your example on others. You might have friends or family members who may struggle with this addiction that may not have the same level of freedom that you're able to have. And also you want to think about people with whom you're sharing your faith. For some people, the use of alcohol might create an unnecessary offense. And for others, it might actually pave the way for you to be more credible if you could have a drink with somebody at a picnic or camping or wherever they hang out. And so with that in mind, take a minute to discuss the questions that you see on the screen. What have you chosen in the past? Most importantly, why have you made those choices? And is there anything that we've talked about today that raises new factors that might affect the choices that you make in the future?